Thank you. So again, good evening. It's really great to be with you all. As Claire said, my name is Sister Gabby, and I am a Marianist sister. I live in Dayton, just off campus. Some of you I know have been to my house before. And I'm just so happy to be able to be with you all. Like I said, I wish it was in person, but you know, that's just wasn't in the cards today. So thank God for the gift of technology that we can be together in some way. So we can give thanks for that. So when the Agape Latte team invited me to do this presentation, I was really excited and said yes right away, but I also had no clue what I would present on. They were pretty much like, anything related to faith. And I was like, okay, well, that could be a lot of things. So I spent some time reflecting to decide what would be a good topic. And what I thought about, not just because I'm a Marianist, but partly because I'm a Marianist, but also because how many of you know whose birthday is today? Mary's birthday. So I'm drinking my decaf coffee. This is a cup, a Mary cup. This, you can't see very well because it's kind of faded, but this is a cup that a lay Marianist friend gave to our community of an image of the Annunciation of Mary by Henry Tanner, who was an African-American artist who did this beautiful image of Mary's Annunciation. So I thought, you know what? It's Mary's birthday. Let's do something about Mary. And I think that Mary, for me, and I think for many of us, can be a person who can give us some inspiration and some hope in this time of anxiety and uncertainty. I think just being a college student is anxiety provoking enough, let alone all this extra stuff of, are we gonna have class? Are we not gonna have class? Am I gonna get COVID? Is my roommate gonna get COVID? There's a lot going on right now, and I think Mary is a good model for us of faith. So when I look back on my own faith journey, and I know many of these Agape Lattes involve people reflecting on their faith journey, I realized that Mary has been with me the entire time. And I'm going to talk about that. She has played a major role in bringing me to where I am today, a religious sister in a Marian congregation. And it's important to say that on my journey of faith, my understanding of Mary has grown with my understanding of Jesus. So I want to share with you a little bit about how my understanding of Mary has shifted over the years, and invite you to consider, who is Mary to you? How can she be a model of faith for you at this time? So one other thing before we really get started, I'm not going to assume that everybody here has thought very much about Mary, or maybe they don't get why she's important or don't think she's important. That's okay. But I would say that to know Mary is to know Jesus. We can learn about Jesus directly, and we do that through the Gospels and sacraments, but I think that we have a deeper understanding of Jesus by knowing Mary. It's one of those things where, like, you know, you make a friend, you really get to know them when you meet their parents, when you see their family. You get more of like where they came from. And I think it's the same thing with Jesus. You understand more about who he was because of his relationship with Mary and who Mary was. I often say that Mary contains multitudes. She's so many things because she was and is a real, complex, dynamic human being, like all of us are. She is both mother and virgin. She is Queen of Heaven and a poor woman from Nazareth. She's the first tabernacle and a refugee who fled violence. And I think we need to understand all these aspects of Mary and really appreciate them in order to know who she is. And what I'm going to share about in my faith journey is how I've come to appreciate some of these multitudes of Mary and where that sort of leaves us now. Okay, so I'm going to start with some of you, if you were in the Callings program, I do a presentation for Callings sometimes. So you've seen this picture before. I'm going to show you again. So this is me at age 5, crowning Mary, and I'll talk about that. But I put this picture because it just sums up my relationship with Mary as a child. And that was my understanding of Mary was she's Jesus's mom. And this understanding of her came with a sense of wonder and of curiosity. So, like I said, this is me at 5 years old. This was at a Mary crowning. So a lot of you, if you went to Catholic school or maybe some Catholic parishes, they do May crownings. May is the month of Mary. So at my Catholic grade school, normally the 8th graders crowned Mary, but I guess the 8th graders that year were like really bad or something. I don't really know. I don't know why, but they weren't allowed to crown Mary that year. The principal was like, we'll have the kindergartners do it, which was actually probably a lot cuter anyway than saying 8th graders do it. So for whatever reason, my kindergarten teacher chose me to crown Mary. I didn't know what that meant, but I was really excited because I got to wear a fancy white dress and a crown, and my older sisters curled my hair like with curlers. It was a big deal. I know that this picture was posed by my mom because she does that kind of thing still, but I think it captures my feelings towards Mary at the moment. Just looking up at her, sort of like wondering, who is this lady? Like, I know she's Jesus's mom, but like, why are we doing this? And I knew that it was special. I knew that it was meaningful. And so I remember feeling proud and just like sort of honored that I got to do that and knew that it was special. So after that moment, I felt like I had a really special bond with Jesus's mom. I remember talking about her more. I remember asking questions about her. A couple years later, on All Saints Day, we had to pick our favorite saint at school, and I chose Mary. And in the 8th grade, I took Mary as my confirmation saint name. And some of the other kids in my confirmation class were like, that's cheating. You can't do that. Like, that's lazy or whatever. And I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, I can't choose anybody else. It's got to be Mary. So I just have always felt like really strong connection with Mary since about 5 years old. But like I said, I understood her as primarily the mother of Jesus. So this shifts a little bit when I became a teenager. And as many teenagers do, your faith is expanded and challenged, and you ask a lot of questions. And I also wanted to feel more connected to my faith. I wanted my faith to feel more like personal to me, which I think is what most teenagers do. Like, you go to church with your parents because they make you, and then you start to be able to make some of your own decisions. And it's like, well, I need to choose to be Catholic and own that and not just go to church because my parents tell me. At the time, soon, part of my way through high school, my perspective on Mary started to shift. I didn't think of her just as Jesus's mother. She became my mother too. And this shift happened as I began to pray the rosary in high school. So of course, going to Catholic school, like grade school, I had prayed the rosary in class. We did some all school rosaries. We prayed in general as a family in my home, but we rarely prayed the rosary, except we did have this really creepy, very 90s VHS called The Rosary for Little Children, where like a very enthusiastic lady runs around with all these kids and they pray the rosary and sing songs. It's really strange. It's on YouTube if you want to look it up. Fun fact for the day. But it's kind of bad. So that was my main experience of praying the rosary. That was until I was about 16 and I went to the March for Life for the first time. I went by bus with my archdiocese with hundreds of other kids my age. And it was a long bus ride, so as they do, you pray the rosary on the bus. And at first I groaned with a lot of the other kids. But after praying it for a while, something changed. I could feel a peace and a quiet that came over me. I found the repetition of the prayers really consoling. And that was a nice change from the typical existential angst that you get used to as a teenager. When I returned from the March, I remember how I just kept feeling drawn to the rosary. And so I would pray it often before I would go to bed at night. And there was one line in particular that would often bring me to tears as I prayed it. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners. I had prayed the Hail Mary before, like many of us did, but I never really thought about asking Mary to pray for me, to pray for people. And that really shifted my perspective. It brought me a lot closer to her. And I think that's when I began to realize that she's my mother as well. So 2 years later, I go and visit the University of Dayton. And one thing immediately stood out to me. Mary was everywhere. Like everywhere you look, there's a Mary. I don't know if you've noticed that, but pay attention next time you walk on campus. There's a lot of Marys. I visited a ton of other Catholic colleges, and this was really unique to me, and I loved it. So it seemed fitting to me, considering my special relationship with Mary, to go to the University of Dayton. When I get to the University of Dayton, I, like many of you, probably can relate to this. You're faced with some newer challenges. You're like, I'm kind of an adult, but not fully an adult. And what am I going to do with my life? You have to pick a major. You have to try to look for a career path. And really asking yourself, what is God calling me to do? How am I called to live out my faith? And then thrown into the mix of that was discerning religious life, which I hadn't really done before college. So in all of this discernment and figuring out where I'm called to serve, my view of Mary expanded. She was still my mother, but she was also my companion and a female friend I could relate to. She was a woman like me. And she was a woman who said yes to God's plan for her. She was a woman who carried a child in her womb, gave birth to him, nursed him, pushed him to begin his ministry. She was present for his miracles and watched his execution and resurrection. Through all of that, Mary maintained her faith. She consented to God's plan even when she didn't know how it would unfold. I felt like I could relate to this Mary because she had to make decisions in faith too. And suddenly, as a young adult, I was being called to make decisions in faith that I never had to make before. So I had to spend a long time figuring out, what is God calling me to do? What is my fiat, my yes, supposed to be? This yes ultimately was to religious life in the Marianist Sisters. And we're formally called the Daughters of Mary Immaculate. So we are daughters of Mary. And again, this is just really fitting for my life, considering my relationship with Mary. And that was one of the things that drew me to the Marianists, absolutely, was this relationship with Mary and our devotion to her and work with her in her mission. Ever since then, my understanding of Mary just keeps expanding. And one of the things that I'm privileged to do, and the work that I do, which I work for the North American Center for Marianist Studies. So I learn and read a lot about the Marianist charism, the writings of Father Chaminade and Mother Adele. And so I read a lot about how they understood Mary. And how they understood Mary is that she is the promised woman, and that we work with her and her son's mission in the world. When we look at Mary's faith, the truth is that Mary didn't say yes one time. She said yes every day. She said yes when she fled with Jesus and Joseph to Egypt. She said yes when she searched for Jesus, when he walked away and was preaching in the temple. She said yes when she urged Jesus to help the married couple at the wedding of Cana. She said yes at the foot of the cross. She said yes to being part of the mission of the early church. She still says yes, interceding for us from heaven. All of these yeses of Mary are parts of her mission, which is to cooperate with her son's struggle against death, violence, and evil. So as a Marianist sister, the yes that I made when I professed vows 3 years ago is the same yes that I make every day. And this is to participate in this mission along with the rest of the Marianist family. Understanding my relationship with Mary as being like, we call it an alliance, a missionary alliance with Mary. It's like a deep covenant relationship with Mary and her mission. It's made me understand more just about how big of a role Mary played in the ministry of Jesus and continues to play. She is the woman who was promised by God to be the one through whom our salvation would come. She is the woman through whom our Savior was born, and she consented to that. So this image here that I have is from a painting by my favorite artist, Caravaggio, who was a Baroque painter. If any of you study art history, you've probably heard of him. And it's a close-up of this painting that depicts Mary and Jesus together stepping on the head of a serpent. So it's Jesus as a toddler with his little foot on Mary's big foot on the serpent's head. This is an allusion to Genesis chapter 3, when God says to the serpent that tricked Adam and Eve to eat the fruit, God says, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. This passage from Genesis foreshadows Jesus. But this passage and this painting also suggest that Jesus's vanquishing of evil was done with the cooperation of Mary. I think we can draw a lot of consolation from this. Mary, even though she was born without sin, was just a regular human cooperating in God's divine plan. So like Mary, we too are called to do our part in this plan, in this great mission to struggle for good and the coming of the reign of God. And the most, I think, like the clearest biblical allusion to this is in Revelation chapter 12. So we hear this every year on the Feast of the Assumption. So there appeared in heaven a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pangs. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. The dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. This is an allusion to Mary. And what's so amazing about this is that Mary is a woman who gives birth in the face of the dragon. Doesn't it seem like these days we're being called to maintain our faith, our hope, our love for our neighbor in the face of a dragon? There's a lot of dragons I think we're facing right now. The pandemic, violence, racism, social upheaval. But can we embody the courage and faith of Mary in the face of chaos and danger? As a Marianist, Mary is the promised woman, the woman who was foretold to be the one who would cooperate with Jesus in his mission. And that is a major way that I understand and think about Mary right now, and gives me tremendous consolation in the face of political turmoil, a polarized church, a pandemic, deepening violence and despair, disrespect for human dignity, and so many other social evils. I feel like my call as a Marianist is to pray with Mary, asking her to help me pay attention to the world's needs, the way that she paid attention to the wine running out at the wedding of Cana. I think Mary is the one who helps point out to me where I need to be in the world, to be someone who works for justice and mercy. I feel like Mary is often the one in my life who takes my head in her hands and points me towards what needs attention. Like, don't forget about those people. Your attention's needed there too. And every time I feel like I'm slipping in this mission, Mary is there grabbing my hand to pull me back, urging me forward, bringing me closer to Jesus, to work with that mission, to give birth to God's kingdom still to come, no matter what the dragon is that we face. So that's where I am today. And just to give you a little information about some of these images, The middle picture is Mary untie of knots. Sorry, I had to sneeze. Didn't come. Which I think UD had some special prayer cards made of that. But I've been praying a lot with that image recently because I feel like there's a lot of knots in our world that need untying. And I think that Mary can kind of help us slowly undo those knots. I was also really struck by this poster image from a rally for racial justice this summer of, yes, we can pray to Mary for an end to racism, for an end to violence. And indeed we should as Catholics. And then to the right is an image that depicts Mary and Jesus as immigrants crossing the southern border, just expanding how we think about Mary and Mary and Jesus, who were refugees seeking asylum. And she's present with them too. The last thing I'll draw your attention to is if you've never heard Marianists say that we're missionaries, well, I'm sorry you haven't heard that, because that's how we are. And we have a sense of mission that's not just going to a different place, but of being missionaries where we are. Ours is a great work, a magnificent work. If it is universal, it is because we are missionaries of Mary, who says to us, do whatever he tells you. And that was a quote from Blessed Chaminade. So we can trust Mary and our relationship with her, that she can help show us what Jesus is telling us to do and to be where we need to be in our world.